Senza quelle non può essere. Poetry needs fables, favole, tales, and fictions, inventions, in order to be, la raison d'être of poetry is also this. In both Italian and English language, there is an idiomatic expression, avere la testa fra le nuvole, to have one head in the clouds, meaning, of course, a person who is often absent-minded and indicates someone's elusive incapability to concentrate in specific contingent situations. I find this locution quite pertinent when I think of Galileo Galilei, both as a scientist and as a man of letters. Of course, he was above all a physicist, a mathematician, an engineer, an astronomer, and an inventor. In most of these fields, he had to have, literally and out of necessity, his head in the clouds. He was a daydreamer, indeed, but one with his mind always plunged into concrete and material matters in order to discover and invent new rules and new systematic concepts of space, science, and astrophysics. This ubiquitarian state of mind allowed Galileo to be, among other things, a poet as well. Of course, a poet of his own original and unique kind, one we would call outside the canon, but one constantly connected to the Italian reality of his time. The purpose of this brief presentation is to focus Galileo's poetry activity, which in general has been disregarded in comparison to, of course, the scientific studies of his work as a physicist, mathematician, etc. The main body of his literary work consists of 9 compositions, a long poem of 301 lines titled Capitolo contro il portar la toga, 6 sonnets, and 2 canzoni, the first of which was dedicated to his discovery of the 4 satellites of Jupiter, dubbed Pianeti Medicei, Medicea Sidera, in order to glorify the Medici's family in the person of Cosimo II, Grand Duke of Tuscany, patron of arts and sciences, who had been a student of Galileo and was instrumental in his return from Padua to Florence in 1610, which is the year we saw the front cover of the Sidereus Nuncius, Magna Longeque Admirabilia, and then the subtitle, the Medicea Sidera. We saw this from Professor Nick Wilding. In addition, Galileo wrote 3 literary essays, Postille all'Ariosto, a poet highly regarded for his satirical vein and for his chiara evidenza, for his clarity, and Considerazioni al Tasso, and Postille al Petrarca. If his Petrarchan sonnets and his canzoni may be considered somehow secondary value and have only a relative relevance in the history of Italian literature, certainly his verses of Capitolo contro il portar la toga and the sharp pages on Torquato Tasso remain among his most provocative works. Galileo's observations on Tasso have been passionately discussed in the course of modern European criticism by important scholars such as Erwin Panofsky, Ulrich Leo, Raffaele Colapietra, Dante della Terza, who was my professor at Harvard, Francesco Maggini, etc. Although Galileo highly admired Tasso's ability in the articulation of his vivid imagination and his seductive tendency towards the supernatural, he thought that Tasso was still, at least in part, lo schiavo di Aristotele, the slave of Aristotle. He loved very much Ariosto, the clarity, the fantasy, the imagination of Ludovico Ariosto. The long poem Capitolo contro il portar la toga offers various hints of reflection on the particular nature of Galileo's poetry, as well as on the socio-historical meaning of his poetic production, especially if one considers the strong attention he pays to the political life of his time. In fact, examining the Capitolo, one preliminary consideration must be brought out which is the scientist's persistent vocazione pubblica, public bent, as clearly attested to in this poem. Capitolo contro il portar la toga was written between 1589 and 1592 in Dante's terza rima, but in the parodistic spirit of Francesco Berni's poetry, to satirize the custom of professors at the University of Pisa of wearing the academic gown, not only in the lecture hall, but also off the university grounds, in their private life. The poem's larger intention was attack a decree by the president, rettore of the university, which required all professors to wear their academic gowns whenever they appeared everywhere in public. Incidentally, Galileo paid frequent fines for breaking this rule. The toga, therefore, became a symbol of the pompous formalism of the official peripatetic culture of its representatives. In short, this poem was a direct attack on the scientific world, which, at Galileo's time, rather than taking an experimental approach in the search for truth, was dominated by dogmatic acceptance of Aristotelian precepts. It is significant, according to Antonio Marzo, a major scholar Galileo, he teaches at the University of Bologna, that Galileo's poem presents a visible lacuna, some lines, especially between line 240 to 41. In the past, Capitolo contro il portar la toga, as well as the sonnets and the canzoni, have been either considered of minor importance in his opus or harshly criticized. A major Galileo scholar, Alberto Chiari, although acknowledging the cherishing his prose as precisissima, evidentissima, lucida e vivace, ordinante e mossa, mordace ed elegante, una vera creazione d'arte, however, considers, on the other hand, his poetic works letteralmente inferiori alle opere scientifiche, trattandosi di pagine immediate più che elaborate. However, in recent years, these literary works have been reconsidered, beginning with the central interdisciplinary essay by Erwin Panofsky, 1954, and followed by the illuminating studies by Raffaele Colapietra, 1956, Maurizio Costanzo, 1976, Dante della Terza, 1979, and Antonio Marzo, 2001. I was a student of Dante della Terza, and there is a beautiful essay on Galileo as readers of Tasso in his book Forma e Memoria, published in 1979. This reflection by Dante della Terza typically synthesizes these revaluations and or reassessments. Ci si domanda ora, e ci si è domandato negli anni più recenti, se proprio sia stata detta l'ultima parola sulla stagione letteraria di Galileo e sugli scritti che la segnalano, se essa rappresenti un momento di divagazione da più urgenti e significative preoccupazioni scientifiche, o se invece si integri in modo vitale con legami meno provvisori di quanto abitualmente si sospetta nel discorso galileiano. Basically he says, I wonder what extent we should consider this literature, this poetic literature by Galileo, whether being a moment of distraction or actually it should be integrated within the scientific research that he was doing at that time as a part of his own personality. In other words, Galileo is the scientist, and to have a normal life, a joyful life like everybody else. Obviously, this is not the appropriate place to discuss these issues, since my purpose today is only to pay an homage to the greatest mind of the 17th century, the Tuscan Archimede, and particularly to his anti-academic and anti-rhetorical poetry, exquisitely ironic, playful, and above all, satirical. So let's return to Capitolo contro il portar la toga, which finally has been translated into English only in recent years. The title in English is Against the Donning of the Gown, published in London, Moon Books 2000, so 13, 14 years ago, by Giovanni Bignami. Giovanni Bignami is the director of science and the Italian Space Agency in London. In the poem, Galileo claims that people could better appreciate one another's true virtues if everyone were to go naked. You enjoyed writing this poem, so I'm sure. Volgo poi l'argomento e ti conchiudo, ti fo confessare a tuo dispetto che il sommo ben sarebbe andare ignudo, e perché vegli che quelli che io t'ho detto è chiaro e certo e sta come io lo dico, al senso alla ragione e te ne rimetto. Volgiti a quel tempo antico, privo d'ogni malizia e d'ogni inganno che ebbe sì la natura e il cielo amico, e troverai che tutto quanto l'anno andava nudo ognun, piccolo e grande, come dicono i libri che lo sanno. As you know, in the old good times, people used to go naked, as we read in the ancient writings. Besides the evident provocation against the academic perbenismo, here is possible to perceive even an allusion to the climate of the Counter-Reformation and its radical reforms as established during the Council of Trent. We just heard a moment ago illuminating interpretations by our colleague. Such reforms included the foundation of seminaries for the proper training of priests in the spiritual life and the theological traditions of the Church, and everyone displayed what was buono o bello, lines 58-60, with explicit allusions here and there to male and female genitalia, though described in metaphorical terms. For example, cervello and pennello for the penis, disegno for sex, la roba for the sexual attributes, poca entrata for the female organ, line 61-81. In addition, as it was the custom in the good old days, to wander naked one could avoid the mal francese, he says, syphilis, since the signs of such a terrible disease would be physically visible in anyone who had this infection. Likewise, any woman having qualche magagna, meaning some infirmity, some imperfection, being naked would show her aliment. Non si temeva il mal francese, perché ognuno, stando ignudo alla campagna, se uno aveva qualche male, era palese. Finally, walking around undressed would eliminate any social differences displayed by clothing or style of dress, not to mention the clumsy difficulty of a man wearing a toga wanted like andare alla fanciulla, to go with a prostitute. La prima penitenza che ci sia è che io non posso fare i fatti mia, come sarebbe andare alla fanciulla, ma mi tocca restar fuori alla porta, mentre che un altro in casa si trastulla, eccetera, eccetera. The sexual allegorical allusions multiply and increase in the final part of the poem, with references not only to canonic intercourse, that he calls metaphorically la conversazione, line 240, but also to less orthodox sexual relationships. Evident throughout the poem is Galileo's desire to amuse himself, of course, and at the same time to astonish his readers through the hedonistic pleasure of poetic divertissement, which has some affinity with Berni, Francesco Berni, we heard this morning about him, or Giambattista Marino, Baroque precepts, according to which il fine della poesia è meravigliare. The ultimate goal of poetry is to amaze. Of course, in this divertimento, both linguistically reckless, often based on the figure of the equivoco or the pun, and thematically daring for all its negative allusions, as well as to Aristotelian theories, Galileo would find not only a counterbalance to his very committed scientific research in the fields of astronomy or astrophysics, but also some moments of private pleasure, which, shows itself as it was its nature. A A pleasure, however, that would be easily extended to an intelligent circle of letterati, perfectly in tune with the best Florentine popular tradition. This was a custom, still today actually. In some bettole you can find these people recite by heart. They invent on the spot some ottave and the other answer. It's a part of the Dialettica Fiorentina to have fun with explicit daring poems, but it's a part of the game in a way. There is no sense of criticizing. It's just the pleasure of it and to hear it. A poem, in conclusion, affirming the dignitas hominis, freedom, as underlined by Massimo Bontempelli. Massimo Bontempelli is one of the very, very few Italian writers who wrote about Galileo Poeta. Massimo Bontempelli is the founder of Magico Realismo, Realismo Magico in Italy, a very important writer, like Luigi Pirandello. He was a friend of Luigi Pirandello. In other words, Massimo Bontempelli, in his essay on Galileo's poetry in 1945, told us, in fact, that this is a poem against all the odds, the conventions, and last but not least, the academic formalisms of which the toga was a pompous and ridiculous symbol. The conclusion of the poem is very eloquent in this regard. Allow me to read the conclusion of this poem. È molto divertente. Quando tu vai all'estate all'osteria, alle Bertucce, al Porco, al Sant'Andrea, these are all trattorie still existing, by the way, in the oldest part of Florida, the most popular part, like, come si chiama quella dove? Ecco, San Frediano. Two of these still exist today, where you can have just cheese and wine or sausage or something. And people still argue, they debate about these issues through poetry. Se tu vai al Bertuccio, al Chiastolino, alla Malvagia, a quelle osterie, guarda quei fiaschi. Innanzi che tu bea, look at the fiaschi. Fiaschi is the particular bottle. Before you drink, look at the fiaschi. Quel che v'è dentro, io dico, quel vin rosso, che il Ferravecchio ne dessi un quattrino, mostrano la carne nuda, insino all'osso, e poi son pieni di sì eccellente vino, che miracolo non è se le brigate gli dan del glorioso e del divino. Gli altri, che han quelle veste delicate, se tu gli tasti e son pieni di vento, o di belletti, o acque profumate, oppure son fiascacci da pisciarvi dentro. That's Galileo Galilei. Meaning, try to recognize the good wine. Good wine sometimes is just in a fiasco. There is a trattoria that I go with my wife and our friend Fabio called the Tramvai. If you go to Florence, when you sit down, the very first thing that you have is a little classic Florentine fiasco. And you pour your wine from the fiasco. That's precisely what Galileo was meaning. Now I give the word to our musicologist, Maestro Morrongiello, who is going to play some music, I believe, from the Galileo's father. And I look forward to hearing you, actually.
Grazie.
Prego.
Maybe I'll take the microphone.
Allow me. Just put this on.
He came to such excellence that he found himself in competition with the best professors of that time in Florence and Pisa, being most rich of the invention on that instrument and exceeding his father in gentleness and grace of playing. He retained his suave style always, even to his last days. So wrote Galileo's biographer and last disciple, Viviani, about his master's passion for playing the lute. Galileo Galilei was born into a world of music, and by the time he took his first academic post in 1589 as chair of mathematics at the University of Pisa, his father's fame as a lutenist, composer, theorist, polemicist, and musical reformer was already widespread. In 1563, the year before he was born, his father, Vincenzo Galilei, published in Rome his first book of Intavollatore dell'auto. 5 years later, in Venice, came Il Franimo, his comprehensive treatise on the science and practice of making intabulations. These are arrangements of vocal and instrumental music in tablature, the lute's notation. Incidentally, I brought facsimiles of these books here for you to view. They're really interesting, so I do encourage you to have a look at them after the talk. In 1584, Vincenzo published a revised, expanded edition of Franimo in Florence and produced the first part of his Libro d'Intavollatore di Liuto, which is a large collection of solo music for lute, all copied out in his hand. So you could see it later. It's absolutely beautiful, this manuscript copied out by the father of Galileo. And it's quite big, as you can see. It's quite a weighty tome of lute music. Among the treasures of this little-known collection are dances dedicated to the 9 muses and other female deities and literary figures of the classical world. I'll play for you now 4 dances from this collection, 4 galliards. They're all in the same key. He gave, Vincenzo Galilei, that is, gave them the titles Euterpe, Urania, Calliope, and Melpomene, honoring the muses of music, astronomy, heroic poetry, and tragedy. These are rarely performed pieces. You can see it's very densely textured music, Vincenzo Galilei's works. They're rarely performed because they're so difficult. But I'd like to now play some more music from an earlier publication. He was a great admirer of the early Italian Lutenist's works, Francesco da Milano, who was also known as Il Divino in his time. And Vincenzo Galilei actually edited several of Francesco's pieces. So let me play for you some pieces by Francesco from this edition by Galileo's father. These are recitare. These are abstract, preludial-like pieces that use a lot of imitative polyphony. This is a six-course lute, which is the instrument that Vincenzo Galilei preferred. In fact, he vehemently opposed going on to the lutes of more courses. He said that you could do everything on this instrument, which has 6 pairs of strings. And you could see it's beautifully constructed. These instruments were thought of as microcosms of the universe, a vehicle for exploring the harmony of the spheres, if you will. So let me now show you another instrument. And I'll play some music by Galileo's brother, Michelangelo Galilei. Let me just tune it quickly because there are a lot of strings here. These are, by the way, they're all gut strings. I wanted to give you my best, so I put the gut strings on. They do take a little bit, they are a bit temperamental. So you see this is a 9-course lute. Michelangelo Galilei wrote music for 10-course lute. I'll do my best on the 9-course lute. In any case, it's clear that the theory and practice of music, especially lute music, brought inspiration, means, and status to the Galilei family. Galileo's father is thought to have attracted the admiration of his chief patron, Giovanni de Bardi, with his lute playing. And Bardi helped facilitate his studies with the music theorist Zarlino in Venice. Galileo's brother, Michelangelo, who wrote the dedicatory epistle of his father's Contrapunti a due voci in 1584, he was 9 years old when he wrote that dedicatory epistle, served as a professional lutenist at the royal courts of Vilna and Munich. He published, as I'm going to play some music from this, an important collection for 10-course lute in 1620. In turn, Michelangelo's son, Vincenzo, followed in the footsteps of his father and grandfather and became a professional lutenist, as did his brothers Alberto, Cesare, and Cosimo. So they were champions of the lute, the Galilei family. So it's very interesting. And I'd like to just play a few pieces from his brother's collection. Very different style. This is Baroque music, 1620. And you'll hear him using the lower courses and give you a taste of this beautiful music. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to also thank Carolyn Balducci for putting me in touch with Professor Fontanella. I performed a concert of the music of Galileo's father and brother at Montauk Library during one of her brilliant series of lectures and concerts that she had featuring Galileo. And I wanted to just leave you with one other piece from his brother's collection. It's another toccata. It's another abstract style of piece. And I just found it very beautiful, and I thought maybe you'd enjoy it. So we'll hear one more piece. And if you have any questions about the lute or the music, please feel free to ask afterwards. Thank you.